Hey, this is Polygon Pig, and in this Houdini tutorial, we'll be creating procedural polygon clouds. I want to make this tutorial to show you the new way to copy objects to points with randomized values. So instead of using the copy stamp node like we used to use, we can now use a for each loop to make the graph more readable. And the Houdini docs also has a written tutorial explaining how to do this, and I'll leave a link to that in the description. So let's get started by creating a geometry node, and we'll jump in here and delete the file node, and we'll create a sphere and change this to polygon, and we can bump the frequency up to something like 12, and I'll name this guide sphere, and then we'll connect it to a scatter node, and we'll scatter some points on the sphere. Let's just start with something like 6, and let's create another sphere. So I'll hold down the Alt key and click and drag on this node, and I'll duplicate it, and I'll name this cloud sphere. So we're going to use this to create our cloud, and let's pump this into a mountain node, and we can bump up the height to give it more randomness, and then let's plug this into a transform node, and then we can squash it down a little bit in Y. And let's create a for each loop. So it's for each point. And we'll create an attribute wrangle. And we'll connect this into the wrangle and connect the wrangle into the loop. So we're going to use this wrangle. Once we set up the network, we'll create some 3 random attributes, and we'll use these random attributes to drive certain parameters on these various nodes. So let's create a copy to points, and we'll connect the for loop into the second input, and we'll connect the copy points into the for each end. And for the first input, we'll connect the transform of the cloud sphere. So if I click the end of this and turn on max iterations and step through each one, all we're doing is just copying that deformed sphere to each point. So turn that off, and let's clean up our graph a little bit. So I'm going to hold down the A key, and you see the cursor changes its icon. If I click and drag down and let go of the mouse, it will automatically align these vertically, and I'll do the same over here. So now they're all lined up, and let's create a cloud node out of the loop and go to scatter shapes and click on visualize as polygons, and we'll mess with these settings a little bit later. So we got the cloud. Let's convert it from the VDB. So convert VDB, and we'll convert it from volume back to polygons, and let's pump this into a polyreduce, and let's just reduce it a little bit for now, and let's add a smooth node at the end so we can control how smooth we want it to be at the end. And let's do a edge cusp just to give it a faceted look. It really depends on how you want to look in the end. Alright, so that's the main part of making the network. So let's create our attributes, and I actually had them in Sublime over here just so I can show you the big blown up version of what they are. If you're not watching me type a little expression in the Vex editor. So we're going to create 3 attributes. They're going to be floats. First one's going to be called guide size, rand, and we're just making a random number with the pt num. So the current point we're on will generate a random number, and that returns a 0 to 1 value. So we're going to fit that 0 to 1 value between 0.2 and 2. So this is the minimum, this is the maximum we want it to be. For the mountain time rand, we'll just create a random value from 0 to 1, that's fine. And the scale y random will do the same thing as before, except we'll scale it into 0.2 and 1. So Let's just copy this and move this off to the side. Put that in here. So now we have those attributes. And if we click the wrangle node and go to geometry spreadsheet, you can see what values they are just to verify that they're all working correctly. Now, the way you use these is let me bring this back over and go over here. So you're going to use a point command, and the first parameter is going to point to the beginning of the for each loop. The second one we'll leave at 0, and that will always be 0 in this case because the for each loop only operates on one point at a time, so there's no need for this to be anything else besides 0. The third is the attribute name we want to pull from, and the last attribute we'll leave at 0, and unless it's not an integer or a float, this will always be 0. In this case we're using a float value, so we'll leave that at 0. Let me just copy this, and we'll go to the mountain time, and we'll just plug that in here and click accept. So now you saw some values, the cloud changed a little bit, and that's because it's now pulling that random value off of each of these points. And we'll do the same for, so we have scale yrand, we'll plug that one in next. So we'll replace the 0.5 value with scale yrand and click accept. So now it's changing. And for the last one, it's guide size. So let's make some room over here. And the way I'm doing this, I hold control and click and drag. It'll bring all the nodes that are connected into the outputs in below the node, so I can easily just move this around. That's a useful trick to know, because it'll save you from having to select them all and then move it. So it's just a quick hotkey to do that. And let's create a new transform node, and we'll plug it into there, and we'll save this guide scale, for example, and we can change its scale, or let's actually do the uniform scale, and we'll do guide size rand and click accept. So now we got some random values going on, and we can go to the cloud node, and first let's flatten the bottom, and then we can also go to scatter shapes, and let's just increase the spatial scale a little bit. And there's two options you can use with this: scatter shapes, and that will give you kind of these bumpy looking clouds, and you can mess with these values. I can't really tell you like use these values and plug these values in. Is more you just have to mess with them and get something, mess with them to get something you like. So scatter, so the secondary shapes, it gives you this kind of look where it's kind of this bumpy style. If you turn that off and turn fill source on, this will give us a more spherical cloud shape, which is also interesting. So if you lower this to 0.1, and you can mess with the random seed and get various clouds this way. You can also mess with the actual initial size, and this will also change the way they look. So I make this very big, you'll see them start coming apart and getting individual clouds if you mess with that. And you can mess with the mountain, the height. Like a lot of these values, it's more just experiment and see what happens. And you can decide which ones you want to create attributes for and to randomize. So you can really mess with all these, and it'll greatly change the way the end result will be. And let's see, one more thing I want to show with this before we end the video is if you go to cloud and go to flatten, one interesting thing I found is if you flatten the top and scale out the bottom, and let's Let's try secondary shape, see what that gives us. Let's go back over to flatten. If you just mess with this and get certain values, you can start getting kind of like a floating terrain, Mount Island kind of feel. Like I messed with this before and got some pretty interesting results with this. So that was kind of a bonus thing I saw. I was messing with these values before. So let's just go back to flatten. And one more thing I want to show real quick is we can plug in anything to use as a guide. So for example, if we use a grid, and let's just make it 50 by 50 and make it 5 by 5. And let's plug this into a mountain node. And then we can plug the mountain into the scatter and go back down. So you can get a more flattened shape, but also you can really crank up the height, and you can start getting a vertical layout to the cloud setup. And another thing you can change is how many of these will appear. So you can start getting some really interesting shapes going on if you do this. So you can really crank up the height to get some very big vertical offsets. So mainly it's just trial and error, mess with all these values, figure out which ones you want to randomize until you get the look that you want. And you can make a pretty nice cloud generator digital asset with this. So that wraps up this video. Thanks for watching.